It's important to sort of see both generations, both the strike generation or the walkout generation and the lockout generation as civil rights heroes, because the sacrifices of those individuals during the school closings, they saved public education for all children in America.
Citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen? And how individuals fought for that, resisted that, and then who gets to be an actual American? Like, that is really our story here. So what we do here in this space is talk about Prince Edward County, where we are currently in Virginia, and the 1951 strike led by Barbara Rose Johns that leads into the Davis court case that goes into Brown v. Board, and then the school closings here for 5 years. So to even get to Brown v. Board, that is a court case that's 5 cases rolled into one. They're all asking the same question, though. The constitutionality of segregation. Does it go against the citizens' 14th Amendment right to equal protection under the law to have separate spaces based upon skin color?
So the origins of the Davis case really are in our local community here in Prince Edward. So for years, the Black community had been working to improve schools here in the community. And part of that early struggle led to the building of the Moton School in 1939.
So in this period of Jim Crow America, post that Plessy v. Ferguson 1896 court case, everything's separate, so it's to be equal. Moton High School was built in 1939. The year before, 2 blocks away, Farmville High was built. Now, at clear expectations of equality, the old buildings should look exactly the same. Farmville High is 4 times the size of Moton. It was built to fail almost. They knew it was like, all right, you got a school, you got something. Unsafe, unequal conditions. This is the Jim Crow era. Everything's supposed to be separate and it's supposed to be equal. It was never equal, definitely was separate.
So there was overcrowding at the building. In addition, in comparison to the white high school in town, the school lacked facilities and amenities. There wasn't a separate cafeteria. The auditorium was kind of a multi-purpose room that was used as a gymnasium as well as an auditorium. And that they also then had hand-me-down materials from the white high school as well. So, students who played on the football team had hand-me-down uniforms and played on a field that didn't have lights on it.
In 1948, the county built what's called tar paper shacks. Those structures were referred to by the students as chicken coops. We're literally in Farmville. They had chickens at home. The same materials for the chicken coops at home were used to make their classrooms. What message does that say about care about Black education?
Those kinds of conditions really led, again, parents to lobby the school board to build a new high school. The school board essentially told the Moton PTA, like, we're working on this, but you don't need to come back to meetings. And so there was really a stalemate going on. And this prompted students to really take matters into their own hands.
To even get us to Brown, talk about what happened here in this space, in this school on April 23rd, 1951. 16-year-old Barbara Rose Johns saw a community problem. She wanted a community fix.
And so she secretly brought a committee of 20 students together, and they decided to plan a walkout.
Her strategy was to get some of the popular students and Moton, people that will kind of push their classmates. They would have meetings, very secret meetings, like on the football field. And it was a need-to-know conversation. If you needed to know, you knew. Otherwise, crickets, not a thing. They referred to themselves as the Manhattan Project. But let's talk about that for a second. World War II, Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. The Black children here at the strike committee chose that as their code name. That's a whole, to fully unpack that, we'd be here for hours. But they knew It's going to change everything, potentially. However, with this walkout, doesn't it?
And so on the morning of April 23rd, 1951, students at Moton were called to the auditorium. The teachers were called as well by notes signed, there will be an assembly at 11 a.m., signed BJ, which happened to be the initials of the principal, Mr. Boyd Jones, but also happened to be Barbara's initials. So they arrived in the auditorium, and the curtains opened, revealing the members of the student committee. The students had lured the principal off grounds to downtown, and so they did this out of a means of wanting to protect the principal, and they asked all the teachers to leave the auditorium.
The quality of education here at Moton was amazing. That's why when the strike happened, the students asked the teachers to leave so they wouldn't be held accountable for the student-led, student-planned, student act of civil disobedience, breaking the truancy laws. They wanted to protect their teachers. They had a great connection with their teachers. They only wanted what they legally were already supposed to have.
And so it's during that meeting that Barbara Johns encouraged her fellow students to walk out in protest of the conditions that they faced. In the wake of that walkout, students met with the superintendent, T.J. McElwain, and said, you've got to improve conditions at our school.
Barbara Johns, of course, was that group. And if I remember correctly, his secretary said, oh, the students are here. He's like, who's here? To do what? So you have a white superintendent's office and a bunch of Moton high school students, black students, going to this office and saying, we're not going to go to school until you build us a new school building in 1951.
And the superintendent said, you need to go back to school. This isn't something that students need to be involved in. And they also reached out to Reverend Francis Griffin, who was a pastor at First Baptist Church in downtown Farmville and had been engaged in the Moton PTA. And Griffin said, you all should reach out to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. And so Barbara and her fellow strike planner, Carrie Stokes, wrote a letter to Oliver Hill. Well, actually, they first called him and said, we want you to come down to Prince Edward and talk to us and help us take our case. We want a new high school.
He's like, no, we're not interested in building a new school. Y'all go back to class. She's like, well, you have to go to Pulaski County anyway. You might as well stop in Farmville. Pulaski County is further west of here. They were having a court case. That case ends up falling apart.
The NAACP attorneys decided to come and visit the students and meet with them. And they had the intention of telling them to go back to school.
If I remember correctly, they kept the car running. Because we're just going to stop and go. I'm like, no, we're going to talk about this.
And so they met with the students down at First Baptist Church. And the attorney said, well, there's truancy laws. Like, you can't stay out of school. Like you're violating those. And the students responded and they said, there's too many of us. They're not going to put us in jail. Like, the jail's not big enough to hold us. And they said, well, you'll have to sort of be willing to challenge segregation. This is bigger than just a new school.
The students initially only wanted a new school. When they partnered with the NAACP, they decided to sue for integration or to desegregate the space.
And the students said, okay, well, we'll do it.
That night they decided, I believe, to sue.
That case becomes Davis et al. Versus County School Board of Prince Edward County. So the first stage in the Davis case was the federal district court. And for these cases, they convened a 3-judge panel of federal judges to decide these cases. Essentially, what the district court ruled was that, by all means, Prince Edward County had discriminated against Black children, that the schools here were inadequate, and the county needed to do something to make the schools better. The district court refused to rule on this broader issue of the constitutionality of segregated facilities. Because of the 3-judge panel, it sort of jumped the kind of Circuit Court of Appeals and went directly to the Supreme Court.
So when the Davis case stalls out here, he hears from Thurgood Marshall. And Marshall's like, do you want to join your court case together with mine? That's the verbiage, to join a case.
The Davis case was kind of not the first case that becomes part of the Brown decision. There's a case out of South Carolina in Clarendon County that Thurgood Marshall was busy litigating kind of early in 1951. So these cases begin to develop, and then the court agrees to hear them. The Supreme Court agrees to hear them and decides that it's best to kind of bundle these 5 cases together. So there's one out of Washington, D.C., one out of Delaware, and then the case we all know, which is the case that comes out of Kansas, which is Brown v. Board of Education. You know, what's interesting about the Davis case at the federal level, that it's after that sort of the Prince Edward County officials actually get busy and work to build a new school, a new high school. So when the Brown decision gets handed down on May 17th, 1954, Black students in the county are going to a brand new high school. So they got their new school. And they also then got they won on the bigger principle because in the Brown decision, the Supreme Court declares that segregation in public education is unconstitutional, that it violates the 14th Amendment and the Equal Citizenship Clause. But that's all the court says in May of 1954. And what usually happens in Supreme Court cases, and court cases in general, is a court gives a ruling and then they give a remedy. They say, well, here's what you get. And so they asked for Southern states and the NAACP, kind of for the Brown kind of litigants, to come back and then present additional arguments about how school desegregation might actually work. And so that led to a subsequent court ruling in May of 1955 that we refer to as the Brown 2 ruling.
And with Brown 2, the Supreme Court says with all deliberate speed, but the lower courts, because they're local, they're closer to the different localities, they'll figure out how to do it.
But obviously they were also vague in that second ruling too. So with all deliberate speed, as Oliver Hill later said, that meant a lot of deliberation and no speed.
So it sets up a legal expectation on a federal level, but not instructions how on a state or local level to actually follow through with it.
President Eisenhower doesn't strongly come out and say that the federal government's going to enforce the Brown decisions. And so because of that, it provides an opportunity for Southern states to figure out how to evade and deny and undermine the Brown decision. In the fall of 1958, this all comes to a head because there's court cases that the NAACP had launched in Charlottesville and in Norfolk and in Warren County up in the Shenandoah Valley. By then, federal court judges are ordering that school systems need to desegregate. So the Circuit Court of Appeals finally has to order, and this is by May of 1959, the Circuit Court of Appeals orders that the Prince Edward County has to desegregate its schools in the fall of 1959. So remember, this is after the fall of statewide massive resistance. So what happens in Prince Edward is really kind of another attempt to figure out a way to resist the Brown decision.
Well, I was like 10 and a half, I should say. And when you first was out for the summer, you really was thinking that it was going back in the fall. You didn't hear right away that it was not going to be in the school. I was locked out from 59 until 63 when they started the free school. It took a while for it to really sink in until you see the other buses from the other counties running and you can't go, you know. That's how it affects you. Like, wonder why our county be the one that not go. the neighbor, he, I guess, wanted us to have something to do, you know, as far as work and make a little money. And so me and my two cousins got put off by my daddy down at the other man's land. And when we got put off, it was early enough, the school bus hadn't come. So we seen some of the ones we knew from Nottaway waiting for the bus, and we was talking to them that morning. And we was going to work in the cornfield, and they was going to school, and that really have a effect on a child when the bus pull off with them on it, and you got to watch the bus go, and you can't go, you know. Griffin would organize all the different things in the bottom of the basement of First Baptist Church, and I would ride with my mom and them up there, because then you could see firsthand what's going on with the school being opened back up. And so he was doing the strategy meetings, and he was talking about, he was trying to get the centers open, and like how many would be willing to go to the centers and that type of thing. After we was going to the center, some of the others that lived closer to town or had rides to town, they was talking about protesting in town. My mama said that we could help any way size going to it and being out there on the street protesting. So when it came to the ones at the center, knew by that time that I could print pretty good. And so we spent the day before the protest making signs. And I think, it's hard to think back then, but I think I made 5 signs during the day when we was at the center. And that particular sign, my cousin that's singing told me she protested because she lived up near Papillon, but I couldn't protest, but still, that's my sign, and she's in that picture, and the third one in the picture. The school's closed, and I had passed to the 5th grade, but I never did get to go to the 5th grade. And by me and my sister was at home, my mama always believed in education. So she would give me and my sister a break during the daytime and say, y'all got to study something. It don't matter what you reading about or learning, as long as you was doing it every day. And so my reading got better by my sister helping me, because my sister liked school, which I was just a typical boy. I wanted to hang with the boys, you know. And if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have been never able to read as good as I learned to read or keep up after the schools opened back up, from reading certain things like the newspaper, and then if you go anywhere, church or to any kind of program that somebody's reading, you say to yourself, I wish I would have been able to read like that, you know.
In this county, there are some people, business owners, who can't read and write. Not because they didn't want to learn, they were literally locked out of their education. It gives education a tinge of trauma. And like, when those kids grew up, could they help their own children with their homework? Maybe, maybe not. I'll share with you, we had a family reunion. I was trying to get everyone in place to do the tour. And I walk up on this gentleman. He is sobbing in the gallery. I'm like, oh God, what do I do? Like, what do you do? And I'm like, how can I help? Like, is there anything I can do? He's like, it just hurts, because it does. But he cries every single time he's in this building. He was locked out of school. Another one of our storytellers, she shared that for years she thought it was her fault. And I'm like, no, you're a baby. Like, what? but she thought it was her fault. And it's the choices of a few have ripple effects on the many.
So for me, like I went to Longwood in undergrad. I was an elementary education major. So like I was one of 25 people in the classroom, usually the only Black person, usually only male. We started talking about Brown versus Board of Education in my freshman Education 260, first class. And so we're sitting in class and we start talking about Brown v. Board, and naturally people just start to look at me because I'm the only Black person. We're talking about something that involves Black people, used to that. But they start talking about the cases. And they're like, and Delaware had a case. And I was like, Delaware, what are they doing? And DC had a case, and South Carolina had a case, and then Prince Edward had a case. I'm like, Prince Edward Island? Like Prince Edward, like British Columbia, Prince Edward? Like, what are you talking about? Like Prince Edward County, Farmville, Virginia, right here. I was like, And so I was embarrassed because I just did not have any awareness of it. I was aware of the school closures. My dad made sure I was aware of that. But like the strike, my great aunts, my great grandfather had absolutely no idea about that until I started working here. And so I was volunteering here as an intern. Well, I was a volunteer first and then an intern. I was looking in the back wall in the auditorium where the plaque is, and I see Mildred, Arlene, and John Townsend. I was like, those are my relatives. And they were plaintiffs in Davis, and subsequently plaintiffs in Brown. I had no idea until I started working here, and I was furious. But then fast forward to 2017, this is my second term on school board, was non-consecutive. So 2017 was the first time we had elected school board members in Prince Edward County. A lot of that goes straight back to kind of Brown and pre-Brown era. How do you control people, right? Appointed school board members from the Board of Supervisors meant, oh, if you vote with me on this part of the budget, I'll make sure your guy is my school board guy, right? Not always, by no stretch, not always, but it happened. And so when I first joined, I mean, the irony was not lost upon me that I was one of the first ever elected school board members to be sitting on the governing body that locked my own father out of an education. That irony was absolutely not lost upon me at all.
We continue to struggle with those legacies, but I think what's also important, and it's when we look at the historical sources about this time period, and kind of in the 1960s, kind of leaders and politicians kind of referred to this generation of students as the lost generation or the crippled generation. And I think it's important that we never forget about kind of what they lost and what the sacrifice was that they made, but they certainly have not been victims throughout their lives, and that they're also a resilient generation. They are a survivor generation, and some of the stories of what their parents did and sacrificed to be able to provide them with some sort of education and schooling, I mean, it's really profound and remarkable.
But I think it's all about money. Like it's enough talk, enough statements, enough apologies. Invest in our communities. Give us better places to live. Give more resources educationally. Give more scholarship money to these kids who can't afford to go to school otherwise. We'll be talking about this at the 75th anniversary of Brown. We'll talk about this at the 8th anniversary of Brown. But unless the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States of America, who also have never actually formally apologized for slavery, by the way, right? If our governing bodies can actually put their money where their mouth is, I think that will be the only way, because we can't turn back time. We can't turn back time. All we can do is, and I think that's what most of this generation would want, if I'm being honest, is to make life better for their descendants. I think that's what my dad would want. I think that's what my grandfather would want. I can't benefit from it, but my son can. My son can't benefit from it, but my granddaughters can. Like, I think that's what they would want. How do we make this a better place for them and improve their education? I think that's what that has to be.